Hello friends, welcome to our series You Have Heard That It Was Said. What does that mean? We should start there. They are the words of Jesus from Matthew chapter 5. There are 6 things that Jesus says in response to some conventional wisdom that I think would be really helpful for us to explore and to think about and to talk with each other around. So that is what we are going to do. This is the first of those 6 sayings. And so if you have a Bible with you in any way, shape or form, you need to get yourself to Matthew chapter 5. And while you do that, I just want to pad out some of where we are and some of what is happening in Matthew chapter 5, but also in Matthew. Matthew is a gospel. And so we are thinking about the good news of Jesus, and there is a theme that Matthew, the author of the gospel, wants you to pick up in his good news. He wants you to understand that Jesus is the Messiah, and he wants you to see that from beginning to end. And that's a huge theme running through Matthew. We need to pick up some of these filters and some of these ideas to help us engage with these ideas. And so up until really recently in Matthew chapter 5, Jesus' public ministry has begun. What does that mean? That means that he has been out and about, and he has been teaching people, he has been healing people, he has been transforming communities. And so, as you might expect, there's quite a following developing. There's quite a crowd literally following Jesus. And so we make our way through some other places and some other things, and we get to Matthew chapter 5, and Jesus is at the top of a hill. And he teaches maybe some of his most famous teachings from this hill, from this point. In Matthew chapter 5, 6 and 7, we have this collection that we refer to as the Sermon on the Mount. And so that's what we are going to pick up. We've thought about this before, and there'll be stuff online from many different places. There are so many things to take from these communications from Jesus, which is partly why we need to look at them and be thinking about them, because they are still teaching and telling us the ways of the kingdom of God. And that's a huge idea too that we need to hold on to as we engage with Matthew chapter 5, 6 and 7. This is some of the most instructional teaching from Jesus about how followers of the way are to live. People who are following Jesus, looking for ways to navigate through life. Matthew chapter 5, 6 and 7, some of the most instructional teachings from Jesus on how to live as his followers in the world. So as his kingdom, as the kingdom of God is declared and is pronounced, and it's coming and it's here and is forevermore. And what do we do about that? How do we live in response to that? And that's part of the conversation that is happening here. Why are we thinking about it? Why are we looking at it? And we're going to look at the second half of Matthew chapter 5. So from Matthew chapter 5 verses 21 right the way through to 48. We're not going to do all of that today, obviously, but that's where we're looking. If you have a Bible with you as you are engaging with this, then that's where we are going to be. And we need to understand this because I think for the reasons just mentioned, the instruction from Jesus and how we honor him, how we are faithful and obedient to him. If we believe that Jesus is God and we believe that he is alive and his kingdom is coming, is here and is forevermore, then we have to live in response to that. So how do we do that? Really practically, these things are going to help us to live in a way that honors God, that God has asked us to think about and to interact with each other as we point people to him. And I think also the days and the times that we occupy, the privilege of the time in history that we have to be alive, there's a lot of opinion and there's a lot of ideas, there's a lot of you have heard it said moments available to us. I think conventional wisdom floats around in our circles. That's not the limits of something that happened in the first pass of Matthew chapter 5, if you like. I think there are still voices in our ears. I think there are still things on our social media feeds. I think there are still things happening wherever we get our news from that's feeding into some of these conventional wisdom ideas. And I think as followers of Jesus, it's right for us to run the rule over those things and see, is that honoring to God? Is that a faithful life of discipleship following Jesus? Is that a right way for me to think? Is that a right way for me to speak? Is that a right way for me to respond? into this situation. And so there are 6 things that Jesus speaks about, as I've already mentioned. And so the next series, if you like, for us will be looking at those 6 things. And so we start off looking at anger. And Matthew 5, 21 through to 26 say this. This is Jesus speaking. You have heard that it was said to those of old, you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. So if you are offering your gift at the altar, and while there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are going to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly, I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. There are loads of things that I want to encourage you to look up and to study in your own time and with other people, and to ask questions of each other from these verses. There are things that are significant in here that I want to encourage you to look at this week and to unpack. For verses 22, but anyone who's angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says you fool will be liable to the hell of fire. You need to do some digging around that language. To call somebody a fool maybe doesn't feel that dramatic, and I don't think Jesus was splitting hairs about that stuff. It's there are some ideas in all of this that we need to grab a hold of. We need to move past the literal and into the intent of the principle. Why is Jesus saying these things? The language here maybe doesn't track with us, but it's to invoke a curse or to pronounce judgment, look down on somebody. We need to get into what that means for us. There is a huge thing within cultural Christianity that I think would be really helpful for us to explore. If you are on your way to offer your gift at the altar and you remember somebody has something against you, God says, abandon your patterns of worship to get reconciliation right. That is a whole life's work in and of itself. Abandon your worship to pursue reconciliation. I don't want to say too much more about that because I want you to do some work around that and think around those things, to abandon our patterns of worship in the pursuit of reconciliation, and then from reconciliation return to worship. I think that changes a lot of our habits. I think that changes a lot of our behaviors. I think that challenges a lot of how we justify a lot of the things that we do, and our focus and our setup for how we serve ourselves, perhaps even in our patterns of worship. And God says to abandon those things at the altar if you must, the most holy place, the place where you come into contact with the things of God. If you have to leave that place to pursue reconciliation, and then come back from a place of wholeness and health, and that you have atoned for whatever it might be. There's no inference on who's right or wrong in that description either. Jesus is not unaware of his words. He's very carefully curating and choosing these things for us to receive and to be challenged and changed by. Even if you're not wrong, even if you are the offended party, even if you haven't been the person creating the offense, abandon your worship, abandon the things that make you feel near to God, abandon those things, pursue reconciliation, and then return to your patterns of worship. That's mind-blowing, but not the point of this communication today. So you need to get into those things. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you're going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge to the guard, and then you put in prison. Truly I say, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. Hang on to that, because I want to circle back to that. I want to speak to us about some things and then circle back to that idea. What's happening here? In the verses prior to this, and if you were with us for our Together gathering the first Sunday of January, then we spent some time looking at the verses preceding this, verses 17 to 20, which would set you up for receiving this. Jesus has made this statement about himself that he hasn't come to abolish the law, he's come to fulfill the law. He is the completeness of that. So he doesn't run parallel to it, he's not dismissing it, he's not reducing it, that he fulfills it. And so Jesus is making a statement about what's right and about what does being right look like. And he's deliberately playing with some of the ideas and the order of what is right and what being right and what doing right. I know in English that doesn't flow particularly well, but that they are some of the things that Jesus is playing with, and he's using the examples of there and then to hold and to contrast the very highest concepts and ideas of what being right is through external behavior, through the nearness to a way of life, to the pageantry and the ceremony, and to the ritualistic elements of maybe faith and maybe a way of life, maybe within the community. And Jesus is taking those things and saying that is not actually what we're after. That's not what looking right is. That's not what being right is. That's not what doing right looks like. Actually, there is another way. And so Jesus says, you have heard it said, it's been told to you, you have been taught, you've been encouraged that the limits of the law don't murder. And we know that from the 10 Commandments, and you can have a read of Exodus 30 if you want to refresh yourself on where that comes from. And so Jesus is holding that up and saying, remember, I am the fulfillment of this command. And so as the fulfillment of this command, I want to teach you and tell you that the legal limits is never the point. The legal limits of not murdering somebody. You don't get a gold star for not murdering somebody. That's the kind of an entry level for being a human. Don't murder each other. That we see that from page 2 in Genesis. Don't do that. And so what is Jesus talking about? He's saying actually that what is required, and you'll see this throughout this communication from chapters 5, 6, and 7, it's more than just observing the limits of the law. That the way that we think and the way that we speak is as important as what we do. There is a connection between all of those things. I know I talk about it a lot. Jesus talked about it a lot. So that we feel comfortable in this territory to be reminded of these things. We're not boring ourselves with repetition. We are focusing on what Jesus is saying is important. It's not the outline and the limits of the law. It's understanding that what you think is as important as what you do. That the way that you treat other people is massively significant because it's fueled by what you think. What you think is going to influence what you say is going to shape what you do. And so Jesus is saying, you have heard, don't murder. Well, of course, great. Please don't murder anybody. But the way that you think, the intent of what you think can be as dangerous, can be as detrimental, can be as painful to people as the physical consequences of murder. Jesus is raising the bar. He's saying, if you think this is what being right looks like, you've completely misunderstood my kingdom. You've completely misunderstood the things that I have come to show you and to teach you and to tell you. And so anger in its most private and concealed forms becomes as potent as murder in its most public forms. And Jesus is raising the bar, raising the bar, raising the bar. Why? We need to think about whatever your picture, whatever my picture of being right is. If that picture doesn't look like Jesus, that picture's wrong. And we have to amend and recalibrate and readjust our standards to Jesus. And we have to look to Jesus to speak to us about what being right is, about what doing right looks like. And if that picture, again, doesn't match up with Jesus, if what being right, thinking right, speaking right, doing right, if that doesn't look like Jesus in us, we have to change that. We have to move that. If it doesn't look like Jesus, it's wrong and it has to move. Jesus is saying, I am the fulfillment of what being right looks like. And so even in our thoughts, to think with anger towards somebody else is a problem, is an issue. And that can feel, it should feel, I think, impossible to us. And I think we engage with anger in lots of different ways, and sometimes it's flippant and ridiculous because we're tired or we're hungry or we're frustrated or somebody has done something to us and we are just on a short fuse and we are irritable and we are set up to respond badly to things, and we understand that, hey, maybe I need a snack, maybe I need a nap, maybe I need both of those things to just get my head back to where it needs to be. But I think we are familiar with anger. Other times it takes a different approach, and we have decided I'm going to be hard-headed about this, and I'm going to get my own way in spite of how I know I'm treating people to achieve that, and that's just what's required to push through, and I'm fueled by something that isn't godly, but it achieves an end result that I feel is justified. Jesus is challenging all of our thinking in these spaces and with all of these things, and saying whatever you think being right looks like, whatever you think is the external marker of being right, whether you think it's the right clothes on the right day with the right people, remember that's what's being challenged here. Jesus says, I am the fulfillment of that law, and I'm telling you, you've misunderstood it. You need to grab a hold of the intent. So yes, of course, don't murder people. You have heard it said, do not murder. Of course, Jesus isn't saying that's a load of rubbish, what a bad idea. Jesus is saying you've misunderstood the intent of my Father when he says to you, here's what I want you to do, don't murder each other. That's kind of you shouldn't have to say these things to you guys, but we need to start somewhere and get a grip of the intent of what God is saying to us, of how we represent him on the earth to each other, that it's not okay to hold anger against each other. It's not okay to think those things towards somebody. It's not okay to speak that way towards somebody else. It's never justified to use anger to achieve my own ends, that actually I lay that down and I look to one who has changed the standard forever, the only one who is able to adhere to this way of being, the only one who fulfills the requirements of these things. And so when I feel overwhelmed by anger, when I feel justified in my behavior, in my isolation, in my frustration, in my response, in my retaliation, when I feel that my fuel is anger, then I have to look to Jesus. Really quickly before we wrap this up, I asked you to hold on to the end of these statements. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you're going with him to court, lest your accuser hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you be put in prison. Truly I say to you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. Whilst I think there is some literal instruction to that, there are consequences to angry actions. I want us again to understand God's intent in these statements, because this is just my opinion, this is my idea, but I think there is a picture given to us from Jesus here that the investment of anger is imprisonment. That's the return on the investment for anger. And actually it leaves us locked in a system that we cannot free ourselves from. Jesus says you'll never get out until you've paid the last penny. How do we maintain the ability to gather resources when we are imprisoned and separated from the things that give us the liberty to accumulate those resources? You can't, it's impossible. And so maybe some of the layers of this picture, Jesus is saying to us, the consequences of the investment of anger is an imprisonment that you can never free yourself from. And I think often we can feel the frustration of that imprisonment that we can never free ourselves from, and then maybe we start to double down on behaviors that have got us there in the first place, and so the debt figuratively increases, and so we put ourselves deeper and deeper and further away from the people, the places and the things of God, because we have locked ourselves into a prison that we can never release ourselves from. Anger, the consequences of anger lock us into a prison that we have no ability to release ourselves from. Now that sounds miserable, and that sounds depressing, and that sounds like we are without hope. But none of those things are where we finish. We finish with the reality that Jesus is the perfection and the fulfillment and the totality of all of the promises of all of those things, and releases us from that prison, even though we are unable to pay our way out of that debt, even though we are unable to work ourselves out of that process, even though our best efforts result in us unable to put a dent in that debt. Jesus, the Prince of Peace, releases us from the patterns of anger. And so I have some questions that I want to ask us, and I would really like for us to connect with each other about. If you're watching this with people, then what I would like us to do when I've finished going on is to talk with each other about these questions. If you're watching this on your own, please connect with somebody. These things are not designed to work in isolation. They're designed to work in community. Now, I know that that's sometimes complicated. COVID makes that complicated. Life makes that complicated. Schedule makes that complicated. But if you are watching this on a device, that device has the ability to connect with somebody else. So send this to somebody or ask them to watch it, and then arrange a time either online, email, message, over coffee, whatever it might be. But the point of these messages in this process is for us as community to come together and talk about these things and work some of these things through. So here's what I want to ask you. What is your picture of being right? The idea of being right, being in the right, saying the right thing, doing the right thing, the example of being right. What is your picture of being right? How then does your picture compare to Jesus? The attributes of what being right looks like in your mind, what does that stack up like against Jesus? And then finally, are you trying, or do you feel you are trying to work off the debt and consequences of anger? And if you are, I want to encourage you to come to Jesus and to feel the freedom and the release of not being dictated to by anger, of not being frustrated every day, of not being worked up about what's unfair every day. That doesn't mean things will cease to be unfair. It means that you feel differently about them. It means that you can abandon your patterns of frustration and embrace patterns of praise, that reconciliation and peace becomes a route available to you. It means that the freedom of peace is available to you, that if you feel that you are constantly locked in this internal battle of dealing with trying to work out your patterns of anger and releasing yourself from the consequences of the imprisonment of anger, come to Jesus. How do I do that? We ask and we ask, and we believe that by faith we receive new life in Jesus. And so we pray and we talk to each other about it, and we ask for Jesus to take over, and we ask for the Spirit of God to move in us, to give us the ability to be faithfully obedient to him. As ever and always, if none of this is making any sense to you, I would love to catch up with you and talk some more with you about it. If this is helping you, I would love to talk some more with you about that. If there's somebody that you know that we can connect with and help them as well, then we would also love to do that. But I really hope you're excited about the other 5 in this series. I hope you are ready to get into these questions now with somebody, and we will see you very, very soon to talk about the next one.